everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Phenomenal Files. We thank you for your patience with this channel and our long absence. Both me and Derek both have a lot on our plates right now. On our website, you may have noticed our recent article on the Loch Ness Monster. In this article, Derek has provided a good synopsis of the history of the infamous Nessie, and I have used this as a base for our episode today. I have added to and expounded upon his article, which you can find at thephenomenalfiles.com. The Loch Ness Monster is arguably the most well-known of all cryptids. She is said to reside deep within the dark, murky depths of Scotland's Loch Ness. Loch Ness is the largest loch in Great Britain, containing more water than all other lakes in the UK, Scotland, and Wales combined. It reaches a depth of 734 feet and holds 16,430,000 gallons of water. Bodies of water of any size are often connected to a variety of hydrocentric myths, and Great Britain does not fail us in this category. Scottish and Celtic lore is rich with monsters and entities such as the water horse, sea serpents, naga, water nymphs, kelpies, and even the Bengnier that we discussed in Part 3 of the La Llorona series. The Loch Ness Monster is only one of the most infamous examples of this genre of lore. In fact, all of the beings above have been sighted in the loch at different times, though these have failed to garner as much attention. The Pictish stones. The Picts were a Celtic tribe that inhabited the Isle of Scotland from the 3rd to the 9th century AD. They were known to carve various creatures into stones. Many were ordinary creatures like snakes, notably, however, a very strange and unrecognizable creature known as the Pictish beast accounted for over 40% of all carvings. This creature at a glance looks shockingly similar to how one would perceive a plesiosaur, the creature that the beast of the loch is thought to be. Over the years, many explanations have been given to explain the beast. Some have said it's a deer, which seems almost certainly untrue, or more possibly a dolphin. Some have also put forward the theory that it was a composite creature that was an amalgamation of known creatures. Perhaps the most compelling theory put forward by researchers is that the beast is actually modeled off articles of Roman jewelry called dragonesque brooches, which look very similar. However, it leads one to wonder if it is indeed a depiction of the Loch Ness Monster instead. Rhiannon's note and addition to Derek's comments on this. The Pictish beast has several different variations, and depending upon the way in which the rather abstract depiction is interpreted, it can be seen as anything from a platypus to a deer. I find it to be very similar, however, to depictions of Oriental or Eastern dragons, or what has been popularized today as worms, spelled W-Y-R-M-S. Attached to this video will be images of some of the carvings for you to see this connection for yourself. In addition to this, I note that some of the unidentified creatures carved onto the stone pillars of Göbekli Tepe also seem to resemble the style of carving demonstrated with the Pictish beast. Several images from the Göbekli Tepe pillars will also be attached, and the viewer is encouraged to look up more. After looking at the dragonesque brooches, however, I am tempted to disagree with the view that the Pictish beast is one of these designs. The dragonesque brooch design is not easily discernible as a creature, having a poorly defined head and lacking any sort of legs. It is simply what I would call a swirly, and apart from the fluid nature of the design, has little similarity to the Pictish beast at all. Saint Columba. The first written story we have to turn to for potential evidence of what lurks in the Loch Ness is the story of St. Columba. St. Columba was a 6th century Catholic monk credited with spreading Christianity to the aforementioned Picts. While not as well known as his successor, St. Patrick, he was credited with many miracles such as turning water into wine, curing the sick, resurrecting the dead, and most notably, repelling away the great water beast of the river Ness. St. Adamand's book, The Life of St. Columba, details the encounter Columba had with the monster. While in Scotland by the river Ness, Columba came across Picts burying a man, whom his companions said was attacked by a great water beast. Miraculously, Columba brought the dead man back to life. From there, he ordered one of his followers to swim across the river to lure the beast out. As the man swam, the beast approached, and Columba held his hand up, making the sign of the cross. This compelled the beast to go away, reportedly as if it were pulled by a rope. After this, the Picts were baptized in the river. It would appear that this provided significant reprieve to the people in the area for many centuries, however, was not a permanent solution. Which brings us to the modern legend of Nessie. The modern legend of the Loch Ness Monster is officially considered to have begun in the 1930s. However, before this, there was a considerable local knowledge of a creature in the loch. This knowledge led to many different scares through the ages, where locals would report either seeing the monster or would mistake common animals for the monster. One such instance was the so-called sea serpent scare of 1852, where Scotsmen armed with torches and pitchforks were ready to do battle with the beast. In reality, it was simply two horses swimming in the Ness. However, looking into mythology, it is not inexplicable that this would cause a panic when one considers the legends of the Kelpie, a shape-shifting demon which would often disguise itself as a riderless horse equipped with saddle and bridle. Anyone who attempted to ride the horse or rescue it would be dragged to the bottom of the loch and devoured by the Kelpie after it was rotted. Its true form is sometimes described as that of a sea serpent. The soul of the unfortunate Good Samaritan, or prospective horse thief, depending on their intentions, would be taken directly to Satan, who is the master of Kelpies, while the body itself would be left to rot. After rotting for some time, it would then be eaten. This makes this sighting more intriguing, considering that the horses were only seen after the reports of the sea serpent, and it is difficult to see how two horses could be mistaken for a serpent. The story which officially began the Loch Ness Monster craze, however, was published in the Northern Chronicle on August 27, 1930. The story came from three fishermen as follows. About 8:15 o'clock, we heard a terrible noise on the water, and looking around we saw about 600 yards distant a great commotion with spray flying everywhere. Then the fish, or whatever it was, started coming towards us, and when it was about 300 yards away, it turned to the right and went into the Hollybush Bay above Dorez, and disappeared in the depth. During its rush, it caused a wave about 2.5 feet high, and we could see a wriggling motion, but that was all, the wash hiding it from view. The wash, however, was significant enough to cause our boat to rock violently. We have no idea what it was, but we are quite positive that it could not have been salmon. This sighting did not gain much attention, having gained more interest after the Loch Ness Monster came into the public limelight. That being said, the first story to really garner the interest of the public is Aldie Mackay's sightings. On May 2, 1933, Alex Campbell, water bailiff for Loch Ness, published a report in the Inverness Courier of a whale-like monster Aldie Mackay had seen thrashing in the loch as she and her husband drove by. Quote, the creature disported itself, rolling and plunging for fully a minute, its body resembling that of a whale, and the water cascading and churning like a simmering cauldron. Soon, however, it disappeared in a boiling mass of foam. Both onlookers confessed that there was something uncanny about the whole thing, for they realized that here was no ordinary denizen of the depths, because apart from its enormous size, the beast, in taking the final plunge, sent out waves that were big enough to have been caused by a passing steamer. George Spicer. George Spicer's account is the genesis of the plesiosaur-like interpretation of the Loch Ness creature. On July 22, 1933, Spicer and his wife reported a prehistoric dragon-like creature crossing the road. They referred to it as a most extraordinary form of animal, and the nearest approach to a dragon or prehistoric animal that I have ever seen in my life, and also stated that it was fairly big with a high back, but if there were any feet, they must have been of the webbed kind, and as for a tail, I cannot say, as it moved so rapidly. And when we got to the spot, it had probably disappeared into the loch. To be honest, this is not very descriptive to me, but I digress. The Spicer story was published in the Courier on August 4, 1933, which led to the name the Loch Ness Monster. It also resulted in an increase in reported sightings and a frenzied interest in the mysterious draconic dinosaurs swimming the loch. The next alleged sighting of a plesiosaur-like creature came from veterinarian student Arthur Grant on January 5, 1934. While riding his motorcycle, he claimed to have seen what he referred to as a mix between a plesiosaur and a seal. He said the creature had a small head and a long neck. Upon seeing Grant, it delved into the loch, impeding him from getting a closer look after dismounting from his motorcycle. Grant sketched out what he had seen and on plain viewing it would look strikingly like what we would think of as a plesiosaur, from the body to the long neck and a small head with flippers. Surgeon's photo and Marmaduke Wetherill. In the winter of 1933, the Daily Mail hired Marmaduke Wetherill to track down the monster. Wetherill, who is a big game hunter, was not able to physically find the beast, however claimed to have found footprints of the monster along the Ness shore. He claimed to have found footprints belonging to, quote, a very powerful, soft-footed animal about 20 feet long, or 6 meters. However, this bold claim did not withstand scrutiny when examined by zoologists from the Natural History Museum. They deduced that the footprints were made from an umbrella or ashtray stand with a hippo foot as a base, thus rendering Wetherill's find as nothing more than a hoax, which brought ridicule to him by the public and his then employer, who quickly fired him for the stunt. However, it is worth noting that the Natural History Museum is run by the Smithsonian, an institution which is notorious among those in the know for its covering up of theories which it does not care for, including but not limited to the confiscation of archaeological finds that contradict the current paradigm. This will be discussed more in future episodes. On April 21, 1934, the Daily Mail had a sensational story. A photograph of the legendary Loch Ness monster with its head and neck visible above the waterline. This photo, though not the first, was the most clear and unambiguous picture of Nessie. The picture was supposedly taken by a gynecologist named Robert Kenneth Wilson. He claimed he saw the creature and took 4 photographs, only 2 of which came out and only 1 was of good quality. For decades, despite detractors and skeptics alike, this picture stood as the best evidence of a dinosaur, or something altogether different, living in the depths of Scotland's loch. In 1975, an article from the Daily Telegraph, retrieved from the 1999 book Nessie, the Surgeon's Photo Exposed, showed how the photo was not as authentic as many had believed. Bringing this segment of our episode full circle, it was claimed the photo was faked by none other than one former big game hunter, Marmaduke Wetherill, to get back at his former employer, the Daily Mail. In the 1975 article, Wetherill's son, Ian, claimed the photo was faked and was nothing more than a toy submarine. An insurance agent named Maurice Chambers was said to have assisted Wetherill. In the 1990s, Alistair Boyd, after having read the 1975 article of Ian Wetherill's confession, tracked down the elder Wetherill's stepbrother, Christian Sperling. At the age of 93 and dying, he confessed that his stepbrother indeed carried out the hoax to get revenge on the Daily Mail for the ridicule he had suffered after the revelation of the footprint hoax. However, it should be noted that no evidence was given for any of these reported facts, and while currently accepted as the truth of the matter, it is, in the end, merely hearsay. That being said, is Nessie a plesiosaur? Derek's perspective. Now that we have reviewed a brief history of the Loch Ness monster, we are left with the obvious question: does Nessie exist? Is there really a plesiosaur dwelling beneath Britain's greatest lake? A creature thought to have all but died out over 65 million years ago. Or could this be just folk tales and fairy tales? While I'll leave that for you to decide, we can review what we know. In regards to the Pictish stones often used as evidence for the monster, there's no denying its significance to its people, having accounted for 40% of all found carvings. While fun to think it could be Nessie, it could easily be a dolphin, a composite creature, or even based off the dragonesque brooches. The story of St. Columba is a great story, but unfortunately more likely is nothing more than church propaganda to convert Celtic people. A story told over 100 years after the events allegedly took place. Notably, there's no reported sightings in the 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, or really the 1800s. Why would this be? Despite Alex Campbell, in his article stating there's a legend of a beast within the loch for many generations, there's hardly any written accounts. In all fairness, given the frequency of sea creatures being spoken of in all cultures around the world, especially for Celts, it makes sense that legends would abound for such a creature with their greatest body of water. Whether it be sea serpents, water horses, or kelpies, it makes sense that they had an idea of something within the loch. However, was it a plesiosaur they envisioned? The plesiosaur conception of Nessie seems to be born in 1933 through the sighting of George Spicer and his wife. This, however, may be no coincidence due to it being the year the highly successful movie King Kong was released. In this movie, which was a gigantic hit and likely seen by Spicer, Kong does battle with a plesiosaur dinosaur in stop-motion fashion. It could be a yarn spun by Spicer, and on a greater level, the merging of a current pop culture trend of dinosaurs with a Celtic lore of water beasts that were said to inhabit bodies of water such as the Loch Ness. The loch, interestingly, does not freeze, and in fact is so deep that the hot water rises and cool sinks, leaving the loch at a steady temperature of about 44 degrees. This would seem promising for a prehistoric reptile such as the plesiosaur. One huge issue, however, with this theory is that being a reptile, they would have to surface to breathe, and according to research, it is thought that they would have to surface as often as once every hour. Keeping this in mind, it is highly unlikely she would be able to hide from a passerby's cell phone, no need to even mention satellite imagery. In the alleged sightings by Spicer and Grant, they both detail the monster crossing the street. It was once thought that plesiosaurs came onto land to give birth, much like how sea turtles do, and based on a more archaic understanding, it would seem imaginable that you could see a plesiosaur upon land. However, recent research has shown that they gave live birth and would seem less likely that they would come upon land, further discrediting these accounts. We also know, for the most part, their necks were very stiff and not crane-like as once imagined. However, in an article in Scientific American, it was discovered that some species had greater ranges of flexibility, which would make the neck less important. Conclusion. While this legend has lasted about 100 years and will likely last many more, no evidence has been found of a monster within Loch Ness. Despite satellite surveillance, despite sonar expeditions, and even DNA analysis, like which was done in 2018 by researchers from New Zealand. They attempted to catalog all life in the Ness, yet found no evidence of any unusual creatures like a prehistoric dragon. Interesting theories have been put forth, such as the legendary long-necked seal, eels, and sturgeons to explain the mystery of the Ness, aside from the monster theory. While it at face value appears no evidence bears out any type of monster within the Loch Ness, it must be left to each mind to come up to their own conclusion. Rhiannon's perspective. We have looked at a few different aspects of this so far, and Derek has brought up some interesting points. However, as one who has watched our videos frequently may gather, I do have my qualms with the dismissal of mythology and the trust of the scientific community in general. Tales of water serpents are pervasive. Indeed, they can be found among every religion, no matter how ancient, nor how young, nor the corner of the globe they are found in. Such pervasive concepts should never be dismissed easily, as it is ridiculous to believe that they were all based on nothing. Myths and legends, while embellished through time, are the original forms of history-keeping. I would like to start, therefore, by briefly discussing the lack of photographic evidence. Many people have pointed to the fact no good cell phone photos have been taken of the Loch Ness Monster as evidence that it does not exist. However, I would like to point out that there are many cell phones which simply cannot take a decent picture in natural lighting over a distance. Add into this variance in lighting quality and a potentially moving target, and it is no doubt that most attempted photos turn out indecipherable. It also must be noted that while everyone has a phone on them these days, when something happens, it is often too fast to pull out one's phone, much less to open the camera app. I cannot count the number of times I have wanted to take a photograph, yet I could not get the app to open in time. Concerning the lack of satellite imagery, in order to understand why the monster may not appear in satellite imagery, you must first look at who owns the satellites. There were over 4,500 satellites in orbit in early 2022, according to earthsky.org. That number is most likely higher now. All of these satellites are owned by only 50 different individuals or corporations. With the exception of SpaceX, almost all of these satellites are owned by government agencies from the United States, China, Japan, and Britain, in order from most to least. Russia and India also have several satellites in orbit. That being said, many of these satellites are not equipped with cameras. The quality of images available to the public, for example, not military satellites, is also lower than one might realize. Google Earth, for example, only uses satellite imagery in extremely rural areas where aerial footage is unavailable. You might have noticed, if you are a Google Earth user, that these images are also not updated frequently. From the official Google article on the matter, quote, "The mosaic of satellite and aerial photographs you see in Google Maps and Google Earth is sourced from many different providers, including state agencies, geological survey organizations, and commercial imagery providers. These images were taken on different dates and under different lighting and weather conditions. In fact, there's an entire industry around doing aerial surveys. Companies cut holes in the bottom of planes and cameras take pictures as they fly overhead. In many areas of the world, this is happening constantly. However, in parts of the world where there isn't an established aerial survey market, we rely on satellites. With aerial surveys, however, we get high-quality images that are sharp enough to create detailed maps. Satellites provide lower quality imagery, but are still helpful because they provide global coverage. Essentially stating that the only thing the satellite imagery is good for is filling in the blank spots. The primary source of satellite imagery that is used by Google Earth is from the Landsat satellite arrays, which is, as you may have guessed, owned by NASA and the U.S. Geological Survey. That being said, can the images truly be trusted? It has been alleged, and not without precedent, that images have been photoshopped by both NASA and Google Earth when there are things they do not want us to see in these photos. The same government organizations that will not allow the public knowledge of UFOs or anything similar for fear of causing a panic among the public. In fact, the government has admitted in the past to photoshopping compromising information out of images. This is the reason that you cannot see detailed or recent photos of the Nevada testing site or Area 51, or may see the shadow of objects that are not there. That being said, if the government for any reason decided that it was not in our or their best interest that we know about whatever is at the bottom of Loch Ness, they would not hesitate to ensure no satellite photo made it out to the public. That being said, I would also like to point out that there have been numerous reported sightings of the Loch Ness monster on satellite images, which have been debunked by various fact checkers. On this note, I would like to address the gap in written sightings. Me and Derek have discussed and debated this point personally and have agreed to disagree once more. While it can be considered peculiar that for 5 centuries there were little to no sightings reported, the key word in this statement is reported. The culture of the people surrounding this area is filled with cryptids, many of which revolve around bodies of water. Part of the absence of sightings may simply be because it was considered a given that there was a beast in the loch. Unless the sighting was remarkable for one reason or another, such as a horrific death, it likely was not considered worth reporting. Cryptids and monsters of all types were considered a part of daily life, with the Celtic cultures containing more types of cryptids than perhaps any other culture. The lochs of Scotland are surrounded by immense mythology. Almost every loch has a creature known to dwell in it, and I am completely going to butcher these. Loch Oix, just south of Loch Ness, is home to a shaggy dog-headed beast. Loch Lochy, meanwhile, is a long and straight loch known for a creature which sounds much like Nessie, known as Lizzie, having 3 humps and resembling a plesiosaur. Loch Coich, Loch Arkaig, Loch Shiel, and Loch Lomond are all known to be home to kelpies, crocodile-headed serpents, or plesiosaur-like creatures. As such, there is certainly a pattern of creatures in lochs, and Nessie was likely considered no big deal, just as most of those I named still are. Nessie is also the least interestingly named of the group of cryptids, with the others having inventive names such as Lizzie, Slug Pig, or Morag. The second thing that must be considered here is that we simply do not have many documents that would contain such reports. Finding written documents from the 1400s or even the 1500s is considered a remarkable archaeological find. This lack of sources would further lessen the number of sightings that we learn about. It must be noted that the culture at the time was a very oral tradition. It may have been very well known indeed that the loch contained monsters, as Alex Campbell stated, without anyone seeing fit to write this information down because it was common knowledge. Newspapers were not in print until the 1700s, thus further decreasing the likelihood that any sightings would be reported in a manner that we would know about today. One must also consider the fact that just because we do not know of written records does not mean they are not there. For example, there are thousands of sightings of giant skeletons unearthed in the Americas in newspapers from the 1700s to the 1900s, yet you will rarely hear of them. It could be possible that there are, hidden somewhere in Scottish or British records, small single-paragraph stories reporting a strange sighting in the river or Loch Ness, and we simply have not yet uncovered it. Nor is it out of the question that they are being withheld from us, going against the current academic paradigm. The 1933 sighting of Aldi Mackay also has an interesting note in it, as pointed out by marine biologist and founder of the Loch Ness Project, Adrian Shine, in an article from BBC. It was 14th of April, 1933, and Mrs. Mackay, manageress of the Drummond Droach Hotel, was driving with her husband along the road to Inverness. As they drove, she glanced out across the still calm waters of Loch Ness towards Aldory Castle. There, in the water, she saw something. In a rare interview years later, she described the moment to marine biologist and founder of the Loch Ness Project, Adrian Shine. She said it was black wet, with water rolling off of it, he says. It went in a circle round and down. She yelled at her husband, "Stop, the beast." It is an interesting remark, Mr. Shine says. Mrs. Mackay's sighting was reported in the Inverness Courier on the 2nd of May, 1933 by Alex Campbell, the water bailiff for Loch Ness and a part-time journalist. It is widely regarded as the first modern sighting of a monster in the loch. But the fact that she said the beast, it's as though she knew there was something strange in the loch already, Mr. Shine says. She was far from a self-publicist. It was her husband who told the water bailiff, and she stayed anonymous in the newspaper report. She didn't say anything for two reasons. Firstly, because she thought she would be seen as self-advertising as the manageress at the hotel, but also because they used to say for people who had seen something in the loch had taken more water with it, suggesting they were drunks. Unquote. This implies that not only was there a history of sightings of a monster or a beast, as Mrs. Mackay put it, but there was enough so that Mrs. Mackay was concerned about being labeled a drunkard for reporting it, as others must have been before her. It also is the only reason that she would feel confident in calling it the beast when halting her husband, rather than a beast or there is a beast. The simple term the beast is spoken as though there is already a common knowledge of the same beast in the area. In this context, it appears that this was a case in which Mrs. Mackay found it exciting but not newsworthy. Her husband shared it with the water bailiff, who was also a part-time journalist. The journalist saw this as an opportunity to get his name out there, the story to make his journalistic debut, and did his best to make sure that the story exploded. All of that set aside, there is another possibility as to why Nessie was not spotted, one which I am more apt to sway towards. It was not there. We go back to the story of St. Columba, the monster of the River Ness, which, as one may have guessed, feeds the Loch Ness, was portrayed here as a demonic creature. If one studies scripture, this is not an outlandish theory. Tanin is a Hebrew word translated as whale, serpent, or monster throughout the Old Testament. It is the origin for many kinds of sea creatures in various languages. In modern Hebrew, Tanin means crocodile or alligator. However, Tanin is also the name of a sea monster in Canaanite, Phoenician, and Hebrew mythology, used as a symbol of chaos and evil. The name is believed to have been derived from a root meaning howling, or from coiling in a manner like smoke. In medieval Jewish folklore, Rahab is a mythical sea monster. A dragon of the water is referred to as the, quote, demonic angel of the sea. Rahab represents the primordial abyss, the water dragon of darkness and chaos, comparable to Leviathan and Tiamat. Note that it is not called Leviathan, but is comparable to Leviathan. It is believed by some scholars that the quote-unquote deep, referred to in the book of Genesis, was this being called in other cultures by the name Tiamat. That being said, there is precedent in the Bible for creatures such as the Loch Ness monster, and they are indeed represented as evil or demonic in nature. Usually they are connected to the Nephilim, or the period of time when the Nephilim were upon the earth, meaning that these creatures could be directly linked to the same sexual and genetic manipulation that created the giants referenced to in Genesis 6. In the story of St. Columba, the creature is bound and rebuked. We know from the Bible that demons and demonic creatures can be rebuked in this manner. The sightings diminish and indeed seem to disappear rather completely, which would make sense if this creature was indeed sent back to whence it came. It is not until the 1900s that the creature is widely reported being seen again, as Derek pointed out before. If it had been rebuked, why would it have then reappeared? Certainly it could not have escaped God's grip. The only reasonable answer in this situation would be if the demon was summoned through satanic ritual. As unexpected or ridiculous as this statement seems, this in fact could have happened. In fact, the most wicked man on earth not only owned property on the bank of the loch, but stated himself that he may have, quote-unquote, accidentally released a demon into the waters of the Loch Ness. Aleister Crowley arrived in Scotland in 1899, seeking a place where he could practice his rituals in complete isolation. He ended up at Moleskin House, a reportedly haunted place overlooking the loch. The infamous 33rd degree Mason believed himself that he accidentally released a number of demons during his stay in the house while attempting a complex series of rituals from the Book of the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage. I do not know, nor do I wish to know, what the desired result of these rituals was, nor the process. However, the entire process would take 6 months. Crowley simply stated in his autobiography that the spirits, quote, got out of hand, unquote, driving away his housemates and, he believed, resulting in the death of the local butcher, whose receipt paper he had written the names of the demons on. This would also explain why the creature is not continuously spotted and has evaded thorough research by many different institutions and individuals over the years. Being supernatural in nature, it would almost certainly be interdimensional, meaning that even if it was right underneath you, one may not be able to see it. This also could explain some of the strange photographs where a wake is visible, however there is no visible creature or object that could have created the wake. There are, of course, many other hypotheses, which we do not have time to discuss here, including but not limited to sturgeons, undiscovered species of freshwater whales, underground caverns connecting to the ocean, allowing strange and perhaps unknown species to travel between loch and sea, sterile eels which have grown past the common proportions, oarfish, seals, and of course aliens, or Nazis. As always, we hope that you have found this episode to be interesting and that you have found the information worthwhile. We thank our loyal followers for sticking with us, as it has been some time since our last post. We now have a Facebook page where both Derek and I are continuously posting on various topics and reposting anything which sparks our interest. Even when we do not have a video to post, you will find continuous content on this page, which I'll provide a link to in the description. Thank you for watching, and I hope that you join us next time.